So this is my wife Aaliyah is here today somewhere. Maybe you've had a chance to meet her, but this is our son Emmett, Emmett David, and Emmett means hard worker and truth. So it was important for us as we were searching for names to find a name that we connected with as a family, and Emmett is a name that's been on Aaliyah's side of the family over the years, and also to find a name that we connected with as far as we wanted to give him a name to live into, to essentially grow into. And so, hey, yeah, it's interesting up here, isn't it? So one of the important things that I'm learning as a new father, so Emmett's about 9 months old, is just how important growth is for Emmett, and how necessary, and how that there's these sort of natural growth processes happening for Emmett, and then there's this kind of intentional growth process that Aaliyah and I enter into with him as we help him grow into a little baby boy, and also into a young boy and a young man, and moving on into adulthood and into maturity. And so there's this sort of life cycle that Emmett was born into. He didn't ask to be. He has this in common with all of us. We're all on this trajectory or this movement from infancy to maturity in our lives. And it's a holistic process. It involves us moving from infancy to maturity physically, as physical beings, emotional beings, spiritual beings, social beings. We're all sort of on this arc, or this movement from infancy to maturity. And even last night, Emmett started, he would grab my hands, and he would stand up on his own, and then he would sit down. And he would grab my hands and stand up on his own and sit down. And so as he was doing that, it wasn't just a game we were playing, but he was growing. He was learning how to stand up and how to sit back down, right? And this week he started waving, doing some waves. And so he's growing in all sorts of ways. He's starting to notice things more, starting to see things, starting to make some of his own decisions, like if he wants to eat or not, and if he wants to sleep or not, and if he wants to wake up or not. And so he is growing in all sorts of ways. And at the same time, as Emmett grows, and as Aaliyah and I get to know him better and are able to help shape his life as a child, as our son, I'm finding that I'm growing as well, as a father, as a human being, as a husband, as a spouse, as just in general. There's all sorts of ways that I'm growing, and some of those ways I'm aware of and conscious of, and other ways, maybe retroactively at some point I'll look back and say, look how I grew because of those experiences, or because of moving into a marriage and into fatherhood. So there's all sorts of ways that we're growing, and we wanted to just have a special guest appearance by Emmett today to help us illustrate this movement or this trajectory of infancy to maturity, because we think that this is an important idea in regard to coaching, and it's something we wanted to highlight here at the Ask event.
And we've been talking about it already. So I want to talk for just a few minutes as we begin in umbrella kind of a term, in talking about our common need as growth. And really our common need as growth starts personally. We all have this need to grow personally. Intellectually, emotionally, we all have the same need, growth. We all have the same need professionally. It doesn't matter what your work role is. You are in the same boat as all of us. We all have the common need to grow, personally, professionally, and certainly organizationally. We all have the common need to grow. Do you guys, I'm seeing some of you struggling with your notes. Can we bring the house lights up just a little for them or not? So is that better for you? A little bit better? Do you need more or not? You okay there? All right, thanks. And so we're talking about our common need in an umbrella kind of a term here about personal, professional, and organizational growth. And the unique thing is that it doesn't matter if you're here today from an organization that's a not-for-profit or a for-profit. It doesn't matter if you're here faith-based or no faith at all. It really doesn't matter if you're here individually looking for something personally, or if you're here representing an organization today. Again, our common need is this thing that we call growth. And when you're thinking about our common need, we find that we really have two kinds of growth patterns. There are other factors that fall under each one of these, but primarily there are two kinds of growth patterns, personally, professionally, and organizationally. And the first growth pattern is what we call an evolutionary growth pattern. Don't get bent out of shape when you hear that word. Some of you might get bent out of shape with evolution. I don't believe in that. Others go, well, evolution, I believe in that. Well, we're really not talking about the evolution concept as much as we're talking about the evolutionary process for growth. The evolutionary process for growth just simply says that there is a process for growth in place in this world, and you and I really don't have to do much about it. In fact, we don't have to be purposeful, we don't have to be intentional, we don't have to plan for growth at all. It's just evolutionary. You and I are born like Emmett, and we just grow. We either grow in an unhealthy manner or a healthy manner, depending on how people pour into us and what life does with us or to us or for us. But growth is set in motion. Evolution kind of takes over, and we just kind of begin to grow. And so evolutionary growth pattern is a pattern of growth where you and I do very little to nothing to initiate growth. Then there's another kind of a growth pattern that's called a transformational growth pattern. And that pattern is when you and I have this sense of awareness that we need to be more than who we are personally. We need to be more than who we are professionally. And we need to add value to the organization that we work for or are with in our role there. And so we begin to create this awareness for growth. And so we become intentional about growth. We become purposeful with growth. And all of a sudden, we do things that affect us in our being. And so there's this intentional, purposeful process that we begin to think through that causes this awareness to happen. This self-social and spiritual awareness begins to take place in our life, and we begin to mature. We begin to grow in our personal development. We begin to grow when we're intentional about that. We begin to grow professionally in our roles when we're intentional. We begin to grow when we're intentional with an organization. And so we're going to look and begin to narrow down now from this umbrella terminology that we're using with our common need as growth. And I want to just show you this next slide and talk to you this morning as we begin about this thing that initiates or facilitates this intentionality on our part for growth. And most of us came in this morning in what we call the doing mode. Everything in process falls down on one side or the other of doing or thinking. And would you like to guess what percentage of your time, your energy goes to doing versus thinking? Any ideas, percentage-wise? When you're in a doing mode versus a thinking mode, what percentage do you think that is?
90.
90? Other guesses?
75.
75? Any other guesses? Well, it's high, right? We pretty much live in a doing mode, and we'll talk about this later. Our doing percentage of our life is probably tied somewhat to our personality profile, who we are, how we're made, how we're wired, how we're designed. But everything in life falls either on a doing side or a thinking side. And growth begins to occur when you and I move out of the doing mode of life and we get to the margin and we begin to move into the thinking mode of life. Someone says something to us and it creates some self-awareness, a blind spot is discovered, and all of a sudden we're thinking. And that creates some personal growth for us. All of a sudden we're not quite sure how to do something organizationally in a role, and we're equipped, we're trained, or somehow we get the right information, and that creates some growth for us in our role professionally. All of a sudden, an organization gets together and begins to say, here's where we are, here's where we need to be, what does a growth path look like for us? And they begin to think together, pull their collective IQ together, a plan comes together, it turns into action through implementation, and there's organizational growth. This is really a pretty simple concept, isn't it? And yet we tend to stay in a doing mode. For growth to happen, again, everything in life falls under doing or thinking. For growth to happen, things are necessary to move us from a doing mode to a thinking mode. Now that's where coaching comes in. Coaching is very valuable because it moves us from a doing mode to a thinking mode when we begin to think through what does growth look like for me personally, professionally, and organizationally.